He said it was just hospital consent forms. I remember his tone, gentle, reassuring, the way a son speaks when he wants his mother to stop worrying. My name is Elaine. I'm 58, a widow for 7 years, still living in the same house my husband and I built when we were young and foolish enough to believe forever was simple. Luke, my only child, had driven me to the hospital after my fall on the back steps. My wrist ached, my pride hurt worse, and the bright antiseptic air in that room made everything feel distant. A nurse in blue scrubs adjusted the drip beside me. She handed Luke a clipboard. "Standard consent," she said, and smiled like she'd seen this 1,000 times. I watched him read, then hand it to me. The paper smelled faintly of ink and disinfectant. I remember thinking how strange it was that even the air in hospitals carried that cold, sterile scent, like it erased every trace of who you were before you entered. He tapped the signature line. "Just sign here, Mom. They won't treat you until you do." I didn't question him. Why would I? He was my son, my helper, the one who handled the online bills because my eyes weren't what they used to be. The pen felt heavy, slippery, but I signed anyway. Then another page, and another. Later that evening, after they released me with a splint and pain pills, Luke drove us home. "You need to rest," he said. "Don't worry about the mail or the mortgage. I've got it." I smiled, grateful and tired. At home, he made tea, added too much sugar the way he always did, and joked that I still used the same chipped mug from his college days. The kitchen glowed with its usual warmth, soft lamplight on the tiled counter, the faint smell of cinnamon toast, the kind of quiet that only exists in familiar walls. For a moment, everything felt safe again. I watched the steam curl above my cup and thought about how proud my late husband would have been of Luke for stepping up. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, it was all ordinary, all mine. Then I saw his eyes flick toward the stack of envelopes beside the sink. Bills, bank statements, letters addressed to me. He reached for them casually. "I'll sort these for you," he said. I nodded, too drowsy to argue. That night, I couldn't sleep. The pain in my wrist throbbed with each heartbeat, and something else stirred. Unease I couldn't name. I went downstairs to make tea, and the counter looked too clean. The envelopes were gone. The stack where I kept unpaid bills and insurance letters was empty, except for a single folded napkin. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he took them to pay online. Maybe he was finally being responsible. Mothers believe what keeps them breathing, at least for the night. When I woke, the morning light streamed through the curtains, sharp and pale. The house was quiet, almost hollow. I shuffled outside in my robe to fetch the paper, but when I looked at the mailbox, my breath caught. The small brass nameplate, E. Hartley, was gone. Only 2 screw holes remained where it had been. I stood there, the cold biting through my thin robe, trying to make sense of it. The neighbor's dog barked somewhere down the street, and the world went on as if nothing had shifted. But something had. I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space on the counter where my mail used to sit. The mug still waited beside the kettle, my initials faded on the side. I ran my finger over the smooth ceramic, grounding myself in something that hadn't been taken yet. A thought kept repeating in my mind, quiet at first, then louder. What exactly had I signed in that hospital room? Why had his eyes looked away so quickly when I asked if everything was just routine? I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that he'd simply filed something wrong, misplaced a form. But a mother knows when trust has shifted, even by an inch. By sunrise, the house wasn't mine anymore. The bank teller looked at me with pity. I didn't understand why at first, only that something in her expression made my stomach tighten. She tapped a few keys, the rhythmic clack filling the quiet branch. Behind her, the printer hummed. I waited, holding my purse like an anchor. Finally, she glanced up, her tone soft, almost rehearsed. "It seems the property has been transferred, ma'am. The paperwork shows your consent." My consent? The words scraped my throat. That's impossible. She slid a printout across the counter. My name was there next to Luke's, the signature an almost perfect imitation. The slant was wrong, though. Too quick, too neat. I stared at it, every letter like a betrayal written in ink. The teller hesitated before adding, "You'll need to speak with a lawyer if you wish to contest it." The keyboard clicks kept echoing in my head long after she stopped typing. They sounded like nails being driven into a coffin. I forced a small nod, thanked her, and walked out into the cold afternoon. Outside, cars moved past without noticing the woman standing on the sidewalk, clutching a piece of paper that said she didn't own her home anymore. I gripped my keyring so hard the metal bit into my palm. It was absurd. I still had the keys, but they no longer meant anything. Ownership was just a line on a document, and mine had been erased. I called Luke as soon as I reached the corner. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. "Luke, there's some kind of mistake at the bank," I said. "They think you transferred the house. Call me back." My voice cracked on the last word. I ended the call and stood there, unsure what to do next. The world kept moving, as if the ground under my life hadn't just disappeared. At home, the mailbox overflowed with letters I couldn't bear to open. The foreclosure notice was still on the table where I'd left it, its sharp fold like a wound. I unfolded it again, hoping to read something new, something that made sense, but it was the same, formal, detached, final. Later that evening, I went back to the bank. The same teller called over an account officer, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a tie too tight around his neck. He introduced himself quietly, then led me to his cubicle. "I looked into the file," he said, lowering his voice. "The deed transfer was notarized and processed last week. The notary confirms 2 signatures, yours and your son's." I shook my head. "That's not my handwriting. I was recovering from surgery. I couldn't even sign checks." He nodded, sympathetic but powerless. "You'll have to file a fraud report. I can print the documents for your lawyer." His printer spat out pages with crisp authority. He slid them across the desk. I didn't take them right away. They smelled faintly of warm toner and paper dust. Proof, but useless in my hands for now. "I just want to go home," I whispered. He exhaled, uneasy. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Legally, it isn't your home anymore, at least not until the case is reviewed." Something inside me cracked at that sentence. My husband and I had painted every wall, planted the tree in the yard, argued about curtains, all those small things that make a place yours, and now it belonged to my son, to the boy I'd once trusted to hold my purse while I paid bills. The betrayal felt like cold water running down my back. I left the bank, the papers tucked under my arm. Streetlights blinked on, one by one. Each step home felt heavier. I unlocked the door out of habit, stood in the hallway, and listened. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, steady and indifferent. I could smell the faint trace of coffee from the morning pot still in the sink. I had built this place, and now it stood on someone else's name. My phone buzzed once in my coat pocket, a message from Luke, just a single word. Busy, no apology, no explanation, just that. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. My hand trembled as I typed back, "We need to talk." But I didn't press send. There was nothing left to say. Not yet. I set the phone down on the counter, next to the foreclosure notice, next to the empty mug I'd used earlier. My hand hovered over the receiver, willing it to ring, to bring back a trace of reason. It didn't. The house was silent, and when I finally called again, he answered my call with silence. He blocked my number before I reached home. I stared at the dark screen, willing it to ring again, to prove I was mistaken. Nothing. The silence stretched, long and sharp, until I could almost hear my pulse. By the time I stepped off the bus, the cold wind cut through my coat like paper. Every thought I had of fixing things dissolved into that gray afternoon. I went straight to the law office, listed on the foreclosure notice. The receptionist, a girl barely out of college, gave me a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. I told her I just needed to understand why my son's name appeared on my property deed. She asked me to wait. The clock on the wall ticked too loud. My fingers ached from gripping my bag. After a while, a young clerk approached with a folder in hand. Mrs. He paused, corrected himself when he saw my face. Ma'am, according to our records, your son holds your power of attorney. I blinked at him. My what? He flipped through the pages. It was executed 2 weeks ago. You authorized it during your hospital stay. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were reading the weather. I felt something inside me drop, like the floor had given way. That's impossible, I said. I never signed anything like that. He glanced at the file again, then slid a single sheet across the counter. It's on file. You may request a copy through your attorney. The air in the office was cool. Too cool. My hands shook when I touched the paper. The ink was neat, black, final. My own name in someone else's hand. I asked, what does it mean? Power of attorney? Even though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. It gives him control over your financial and legal affairs, the clerk said gently. He can act on your behalf. The words hit harder than the cold. Luke's voice echoed in my head, something he'd said months ago, laughing while fixing the fence. That house is wasted on one person. I'd brushed it off then, thinking he meant I should downsize, not disappear. I stepped back, the paper still trembling between my fingers. Is there any way to cancel it? You'll need to contest it formally, he said, looking almost sorry for me. Once filed, it stands until revoked through court. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The office walls felt closer, the air thinner. The clerk hesitated, then added quietly, if you believe it was signed under false pretenses, you should speak with legal aid. They can help. Outside, the wind hit like punishment. My coat barely held the chill away. I walked to the bus stop, though I couldn't remember deciding to. My phone screen stayed black when I tried to call him again. The bus came, brakes hissing. I climbed aboard, sat near the window, and pressed my forehead to the glass. My reflection stared back, older, smaller, unrecognizable. At every stop, I thought about turning back, confronting him, demanding an explanation. But what would I even say? That I'd raised him better? That I still loved him despite what he'd done? The words tasted bitter before they left my mouth. When the bus reached my street, the sky had already darkened. I walked slowly, the keys in my pocket heavy and pointless. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. A weak promise that home still meant something. But as I looked at that familiar door, I realized I was no longer sure what waited behind it. I tightened my coat, drew a slow breath, and whispered to myself, this isn't over. The decision settled in my bones, cold but solid. I decided to fight with proof, not tears. My front door key no longer turned. I twisted it once, twice, then harder, until the cold metal cut into my skin. It was the same key I'd used for 20 years, worn smooth on one side. The deadbolt refused to give. I knocked. Laughter floated from inside. Young, careless, familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten. A man I didn't know opened the door halfway. Paint flecked his hair, his shirt smeared with white dust. "You need something?" he asked, casual, like I was a stranger at his porch. "This is my house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He blinked. "Luke said you'd stop by. We're repainting the living room before the move-in inspection." I stepped forward, but he blocked the door with his body. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of new boxes stacked where my husband's chair used to sit. Someone laughed again from inside, a woman's voice this time. My throat went dry. "Move-in inspection?" I whispered. "What are you talking about?" "Talk to Luke," he said, then shut the door in my face. I stood there on the porch, the wind lifting the edge of my coat. My hand brushed the wooden railing. It was rough, splintered, like it hadn't been sanded in years. The sharp edge dug into my palm, grounding me just enough to keep from breaking down. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 before I could think twice. "There are strangers in my home," I told the operator. "My son may have let them in, but I didn't give permission." She asked if it was an active threat. I said no, just wrong, deeply wrong. When the police car arrived, blue lights flickering across the yard, 2 officers stepped out. One took my statement while the other knocked on the door. Luke wasn't there, just his friends, calm and smirking. The older officer came back holding a clipboard. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "according to property records, you're listed as a guest here, not the owner." "That's not true," I said. "It's my house. My husband and I—" He raised a hand, trying to soften it. "I'm not here to decide ownership. It's a civil matter. You'll need to take it up with the courts." I stared past him at the front windows. Through the glass, I could see my dining table covered in paint supplies. The curtains I'd sewn myself were gone. One of the men rolled a coat of white over the old wallpaper, erasing every trace of the life I'd built inside those walls. I could almost hear Luke saying, "We'll make it fresh again," like he had some right to rewrite our history. "Please," I said to the officer, my voice small, "can you at least make them stop until I sort this out?" He looked at his partner, then back at me. "We can't remove them, ma'am. On paper, they have permission. I'll file a note that we were here. Family dispute, no trespass. That's the best we can do." I nodded, though I didn't understand how a note could fix anything. He tore off a copy for me, the paper stiff in my fingers, the ink still wet. It meant nothing and everything at once. A record that I existed, that I had stood here and tried. When the patrol car left, the house seemed smaller, almost foreign. I sat on the porch steps, staring at the chipped paint. My hands shook. Every breath felt like a betrayal of its own. Then the door opened again. One of the painters leaned out, phone in hand. "Luke says to tell you not to make a scene," he said, grinning. "He says people are starting to think you're unstable." The word hit me harder than the cold. I stood, not trusting my voice. He laughed and shut the door again. I walked down the steps slowly, gripping the useless key in my hand until the ridges cut into my skin. The street was quiet. A neighbor's curtain shifted, someone watching but saying nothing. The world felt tilted, rules rewritten overnight. I wanted to scream, to bang on the door until someone listened, but instead, I slipped the key into my pocket and kept walking. The wind stung my face. Behind me, I could still hear the faint scrape of paint rollers covering over my past one stroke at a time. He told them I was unstable. They called me delusional on the report. That single word followed me through the hall like a shadow I couldn't shake. I held the folded letter in my hand, the paper thin and too warm for my grip. Sunlight cut through the clinic's glass doors, sharp enough to make me squint. Inside, the waiting room hummed with quiet chatter and the faint click of keyboards. I'd come here to find out how my name ended up in a psychiatric review I never agreed to. When I reached the counter, the receptionist looked at the form I handed her. "It says evaluation requested by family," she said, lowering her voice. "Would you like to speak with a therapist today?" I nodded before she could finish the sentence. I needed someone to hear me. Not as a patient, but as a person trying to stay sane in a life that no longer made sense. They called me delusional. My own son had written that word somewhere, signed it, filed it. The thought made my chest tighten. The therapist's office smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. She sat across from me, pen poised, eyes calm. "Tell me what's going on," she said. I told her everything, from the hospital papers Luke made me sign to the day I found strangers painting my walls. Her eyebrows drew together, but she didn't interrupt. The sunlight from the window hit her glasses just right, flashing across the room each time she looked up from her notes. I followed that light because it was easier than facing her pity. When I finished, she leaned back, thoughtful. "You're saying your son arranged a property transfer without your consent, and now he's questioning your mental state." "Yes," I said. "And I need to prove I'm not the one who's lost control." She nodded slowly. "I'll write my evaluation clearly. You appear competent, oriented, aware of details. This document can serve as evidence if you pursue legal help." My throat tightened again, but this time from relief. "Thank you," I whispered. She hesitated. "Be careful, though. If someone's already built a case around your instability, it may not stop with one note." That warning lingered long after I left. Outside, the afternoon light was unforgiving. Cars passed, voices drifted, and I realized how fragile truth was when someone with power decided to twist it. At home, I spread my documents across the table. The foreclosure letter, the forged deed, the new evaluation. They looked like fragments of a life on trial. I thought about Luke's smile, the way he'd spoken softly while leading me through the hospital paperwork. Maybe he believed what he was doing was practical, even justified. Maybe he thought I'd thank him later. But practicality without love becomes cruelty dressed as reason. I placed the therapist's note on top of the pile, weighted it down with a glass paperweight shaped like a globe. My husband had given it to me years ago, saying it meant the world could fit in your hand if you held it steady. I wasn't steady now, but I was learning. That night, I stared at an old photo of Luke as a child, mud on his knees, grin wide enough to forgive anything. I wanted to remember that version of him, not the man who'd filed a report calling me delusional. But even as I tried, the words on the page burned themselves into my mind. When the phone rang, I jumped. It was Luke's voice, flat and cold. "Mom, don't make a big deal out of that doctor thing," he said. "It doesn't mean anything." "Doesn't it?" I asked quietly. "It's just a precaution," he said. "You've been forgetful." "I remember enough," I said, holding the phone close. "Enough to know what you're doing." There was a pause. Then he hung up. I stood there staring at the silent receiver, heart pounding in my chest. For a long time I didn't move. The sunlight on the counter had faded, leaving only the paperweight glinting faintly beside the report, proof that someone still saw me clearly, even if he refused to. He said the doctor's note meant nothing. The tax office flagged my social number. I thought it was a clerical mistake until the woman on the phone said, "There's been unusual activity linked to your name." Her tone was polite, but my stomach dropped. She told me to bring identification to the local office. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. I'd already lost my home, my peace, and now, maybe even my savings. The office was small, fluorescent, cold. Papers shuffled, printers hummed, and the air smelled faintly of toner and stale coffee. A man in a gray suit introduced himself as an auditor. He gestured for me to sit and opened a file that already had my name printed on the top. "We noticed multiple withdrawals from your account totaling $42,000, he said. "Can you confirm what they were for?" $42,000? My voice came out thin. "That's impossible." He turned the document so I could see. The page was full of transactions, each one authorized, each marked with my electronic signature. I recognized none of them. "All transfers went to a business account registered under Luke's name," he continued. "Hartley Property Services." I felt dizzy. "That's my son's business," I whispered. He nodded, cautious. "Did you give him permission?" I stared at the columns of numbers. Each one felt like a bruise I hadn't noticed before. "No," I said, "I didn't." He sighed, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Then I'm afraid this qualifies as financial exploitation. It's more common than people think." His words were gentle, but they still sounded like a verdict. "We can document this, but you'll need to file a fraud complaint. That's the only way to start recovery." For a long moment, I just stared at the page. My name, my life, reduced to figures. "Can it be undone?" I asked. "It takes time," he said. "But evidence matters. The sooner you report, the stronger your case." I nodded slowly. He handed me another form, blank except for a signature line. "This gives us permission to flag the account for investigation. Once filed, we'll send the complaint directly to the financial division." I hesitated, pen hovering above the paper. Every signature lately had cost me something, but not signing would cost me everything. "Will he be notified?" I asked. "Yes, his lawyer will receive a copy," he said carefully. "It's standard procedure." The smell of toner was stronger now, mixing with the faint scent of dust and ink. I signed. My hand didn't tremble this time. He looked up. "I'll attach a certified statement. You'll get confirmation by mail within 2 weeks." As I gathered my purse, he added quietly, "You're doing the right thing, even when it feels impossible." Outside, the afternoon air hit me, warm but heavy. I walked to the bus stop, the paper folded neatly in my coat pocket. A child nearby laughed, chasing a pigeon across the sidewalk. The sound barely reached me. My thoughts circled the same question over and over. How far could Luke go before realizing what he'd done? When I got home, I placed the form on the kitchen table beside my old photo of us at 12, grinning with paint on his hands after helping his father fix the fence. I traced the edge of the picture, wondering when that boy disappeared. I made tea, the same way I always did, and sat in silence until the sun went down. The mug warmed my palms, but it couldn't reach the chill inside me. Filing the complaint meant war. It meant I was no longer just his mother. I was now his accuser. The stakes had changed forever. Later that night, the phone buzzed. A new email arrived. Complaint received, forwarded to Respondents' Counsel. The complaint went straight to his lawyer. His attorney accused me of elder neglect. The words barely made sense when I first read them, printed in neat black type across the official court letter. I unfolded the paper again, certain I'd misread it. But there it was, formal, cold, accusing me of stealing from my own son's trust fund. The irony burned. The envelope crinkled in my hands as I sat in the courthouse waiting area. Every sound, the shuffle of papers, the echo of footsteps, seemed too loud. 10 days, the letter said. 10 days to respond before judgment would proceed. My pulse thudded like a ticking clock I couldn't stop. When the public defender finally called my name, I followed her into a narrow office. She was younger than I expected, hair tied back, face composed, but tired. "I've reviewed the filing," she said, flipping open the folder. "He's claiming financial mismanagement dating back 5 years. Says you accessed his savings without consent." I almost laughed, though it came out closer to a gasp. "He's the one who drained my account." She looked up. "Can you prove that?" I nodded. "I have statements from the auditor, copies of every transaction." "Good," she said, though her tone carried a warning. "You'll need to organize them chronologically. The court doesn't want emotion, only evidence. Facts, not feelings." The rustle of her papers filled the silence between us. It was the same sound the clerk had made when reading the transfer files weeks earlier, the same rhythm of bureaucracy swallowing truth. I stared at the letter again, my own name beside the word defendant. It was a cruel inversion of everything motherhood was supposed to mean. She slid another document across the desk. "This is the formal response form. We'll file once you've gathered your records. 10 days is short, but it's manageable." "What happens if we don't?" I asked. She hesitated. "Then the accusation stands uncontested. You'd lose by default." For a moment the air felt heavy, pressing against my ribs. "He's rewriting history," I whispered. "He's making me the thief." The lawyer sighed, soft but weary. "It happens more often than you think. People twist family trust into leverage. We'll untangle it, but we have to move quickly." As I left, the courthouse hallway felt colder than outside. The buzz of fluorescent lights followed me to the exit. I tucked the letter into my coat pocket, but the paper's edge scratched against my palm like a warning. On the bus ride home, I kept thinking about what she said. Facts, not feelings. But my life wasn't a spreadsheet. It was years of sacrifice, of bills paid late so he could have what he wanted, of trust I thought couldn't be broken. When I got home, I emptied an old shoebox onto the table, receipts, bank slips, handwritten notes, all the pieces of proof that might keep me from losing everything. I stacked them by date, trying to impose order on chaos. My hands trembled with every paper I touched. I paused when I found one envelope tucked between the folders. It was from Luke, dated 2 years back. I hadn't looked at it since. Inside was a letter thanking me for helping him start his business. "You've always believed in me," he'd written. I held it up to the light, and something caught my eye. His signature at the bottom wasn't quite the same as the one on the legal transfer forms. The loops were tighter, the slant steeper. My heart picked up. I compared them side by side, lining the pages against the edge of the table. The difference was clear. Maybe small to anyone else, but to me, it was everything. Proof that the signatures on the financial documents weren't mine, and not quite his either. I slipped both papers into a new folder, sealing them inside like a secret I finally owned. The stakes were higher now. Every breath carried the weight of it. I would not let him turn my name into a lie. The next morning, I returned to the courthouse to drop off the first batch of evidence. The clerk behind the counter took the folder without looking up. "We'll notify counsel," she said, stamping the form. The hollow sound of the stamp echoed in the empty hall. As I stepped outside, the winter air bit through my coat, sharp but clarifying. I could feel the shift, tiny but real. For the first time since this began, I wasn't just reacting. I was preparing. I went home, spread out the rest of the paperwork, and started cross-checking each page. My eyes blurred from hours of reading, but I didn't stop. Near midnight, one corner of a copied page caught under my thumb, a line of handwriting that didn't match the others. I leaned closer, tracing the curve of the letter L. And there it was, unmistakable, hidden among the forgeries he'd slipped past the bank. I found one page he hadn't forged. His spreadsheet didn't balance. I saw it the moment the accountant handed me the file, the faint shake in his hand betraying what the numbers tried to hide. We sat in his cramped office, papers piled high, calculator blinking on the desk like a silent witness. The air felt heavy, stale with coffee and old ink. I'd asked for Luke's business reports just to verify some details. The man had agreed too quickly. That told me something was wrong. He tapped through his folders until the file appeared, rows of figures neatly aligned, dates running down one side. "It's all there," he said, voice careful. "Monthly disbursements, invoices, tax adjustments." I leaned forward. "Then tell me why 2 identical transfers of $8,500 went out on the same date." He froze. For a second, only the faint buzz from the heater filled the room. "That must be an input error," he muttered. "No," I said quietly. "You checked this twice before signing off. You wouldn't miss $17,000. His jaw tightened. The number hung between us, solid and undeniable. "Look, I just handle the statements," he said. "Luke's the one who authorizes movement between accounts." "So you knew," I whispered, "and you said nothing." He ran a hand through his hair. "You don't understand. He said it was a personal arrangement. I didn't want to get caught between family." That word again. Family. As if it justified everything. I opened my folder and slid out a copy of the auditor's report from weeks ago. "Here's the breakdown," I said. "His withdrawals, my balance, your ledger. They don't align. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft." The accountant looked at the page, then at me. "You could ruin him with this." "Maybe he already ruined himself," I said. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he sighed, defeated. "If you're right, this printout will show the same transfer tagged twice in the bank's system. I'll confirm it in writing." As he typed, I felt a chill run down my spine despite the heater's steady hum. The room seemed smaller now, every wall closing in with the weight of what we both knew. "He's going to come after you for this," the man said without looking up. "I'm not afraid anymore," I said. "Not of him, and not of the truth." He printed the sheet, the machine sputtering as if reluctant to expose what it contained. The paper came out warm, edges curling slightly. The duplicate entries stared back at me, black and final. 2 identical transactions, same amount, same date, same authorization code. But only one appeared in the declared income. $17,000 gone. Proof. I gathered the pages slowly. "Do you keep archives of his older reports?" I asked. "Yes," he said, hesitating. "Why?" "Because if he's done it once, he's done it before." He looked away. "You didn't hear it from me, but check his equipment invoices from last spring. They don't add up either." I nodded. I will. When I stepped outside, the air hit me sharp and cold. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching the folder against my chest. Every betrayal before this one had been emotional, hidden behind words or silence. But this was written in numbers. Ink doesn't lie. Back home, I spread the pages on the kitchen table, flattening them beneath my palm. My hands were still trembling. I looked at Luke's handwriting, the confident slant of his initials beside every transfer. I used to think pride was what drove him, to build, to succeed, to provide. Now I saw it clearly. It was greed disguised as ambition. The stakes were no longer just personal. This wasn't about a house or inheritance anymore. It was about justice. If I didn't act, the story he'd written about me would become permanent record. I couldn't let that happen. I organized everything into a new folder, labeled in bold letters, Luke Transactions. I double-checked the dates, highlighted the matching sums, attached the accountant's written note at the back. It was more than evidence. It was armor. Before I sealed the envelope, I hesitated, tracing the edge with my finger. I thought about the boy who once sat at this same table, learning how to balance his allowance, counting coins out loud while I taught him about honesty. Money is just a mirror, I'd told him back then. It shows who you really are. I slipped the pages inside, closed the flap, and pressed it flat. Then I called the fraud division, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. I have proof of duplicate withdrawals, I said. 2 transfers of $8,500, both signed under my name. Please submit copies of all supporting documents, the agent replied. We'll open an official file. I looked down at the folder, at the neat black letters of his name. They're ready, I said. I sent copies to the fraud division. They called my name in the courthouse hall. My shoes echoed against the marble floor, and every step sounded louder than it should. The air inside was dry and heavy, thick with murmurs from other cases waiting their turn. I clutched the folder against my chest, its edges worn soft from days of handling. When they opened the courtroom door, I felt every eye turn. Luke sat at the front table beside his lawyer, head tilted down, pretending not to see me. The judge glanced at the clock. We'll proceed with the matter of disputed accounts and property rights, he said. The microphone on the table flickered to life, the thin wire brushing against my wrist as I sat down. It felt strange, how something so small could capture every word that might change the course of a life. Luke's attorney stood first, calm and practiced. Your Honor, he began, my client acted purely out of concern. Funds were temporarily secured to protect family assets while his mother was recovering. Temporarily, I repeated under my breath. The word tasted sour. The clerk beside the bench, a quiet woman with sharp eyes, recorded every statement as it came. Her pen moved steadily, never pausing, as though truth itself depended on the rhythm of her hand. When it was my turn, the judge gestured toward the microphone. State your understanding of these transfers, he said. I took a breath. They weren't transfers, I said. They were theft. My signature was forged on every document. The attorney cut in. Objection. That's an assumption. Overruled, the judge said. Let her continue. I opened the folder. Here's his accountant's report. 2 identical withdrawals of $8,500 each, plus 1 unreported transfer of $17,000. They all trace back to his business account. The auditor's signature confirms it. A faint murmur moved through the room. The judge raised a hand for silence. Luke still wouldn't look at me. His hands fidgeted with a pen, spinning it the way he used to when nervous as a child. I moved it for safekeeping, he said suddenly. His voice cracked. She was confused. She was forgetting things. I had to act before she lost everything. The courtroom went still. His lawyer stiffened. The clerk's pen froze mid-line before racing again. The judge leaned forward. Did you just say you moved the funds personally? Luke swallowed. Yes, but only... That will be entered into record, the judge said. The wire brushed my wrist again as I leaned toward the microphone. You didn't move it for me, I said. You moved it away from me. He glared up at me, voice trembling. You don't understand what it's like watching someone fall apart. Then you should have held me up, not stripped me down, I replied. 3 quick sentences hung in the air. Why did you lie? Because you made me feel small. Then you never knew me at all. The silence that followed felt colder than the room itself. The clerk cleared her throat, summarizing aloud for the record. Defendant confirms transfer of funds made personally, under pretext of safekeeping, without formal consent. Each word landed like a nail closing a lid. The lawyer tried to recover. Your Honor, my client's statement has been misinterpreted. He meant to imply management, not ownership. But the judge interrupted, weary now. We'll let the transcript speak for itself. He turned to me. Do you have any additional evidence? Yes, I said, sliding one last page across the table. A notarized statement from the accountant confirming the mismatched totals. It was signed this morning. He took it, glanced once, then handed it to the clerk. This will be reviewed before our next session. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. This hearing is adjourned until next month. As people began to move, Luke stood. He finally met my eyes, but there was no remorse there, only defiance. You think you've won, he muttered, close enough for me to hear. I straightened the papers in my folder. Not yet, I said, but the truth finally has my voice. The clerk paused beside me as I left. You did well, she whispered. That slip he made, it's on record now. Outside, the courthouse steps shimmered with late afternoon heat. I stopped halfway down and looked back at the tall stone building behind me. Justice was slow, maybe cruelly so, but it had a pulse again. For the first time in months, I felt the ground hold steady beneath my feet. I pulled my coat tighter around me, the folder pressed against my ribs like armor. The next session wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming the part of me he'd tried to erase. The next session would decide who owned my name. A white envelope from the court arrived. It was thick, sealed cleanly, and heavier than it looked. I turned it over twice before opening it, half afraid of what it might take away next. The motel desk lamp threw a narrow glow across the paper as I slid the document out. My fingers left faint creases along the edge. The header carried the court seal, crisp and embossed, my name printed correctly this time. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd been forced to surrender. The first line read, Hearing continuation granted. Temporary injunction on property transfer. I read it twice to be sure. Those few words meant my home couldn't be sold. Not yet. Authority, something I'd lost faith in, had finally spoken for me instead of against me. I sat on the bed, letter trembling slightly in my hand. The lamp hummed faintly beside me, throwing long shadows on the wall. For months, every official envelope had carried loss. This one carried pause, not victory, but a breath. I called the courthouse to confirm. The clerk's tone softened when she pulled up the case. Yes, ma'am. The injunction stands until the full accounting is produced. He'll have to disclose every asset. How long do I have? I asked. 14 days until review, she said. If he fails to comply, you can petition for permanent reinstatement. 14 days, 2 weeks. That was the first solid number in this mess that didn't belong to him. When I hung up, the silence felt different, less like emptiness, more like room to breathe. I laid the paper flat on the nightstand beside my pen and small notebook. The judge's order was written in cold, bureaucratic phrasing, but I could hear the meaning underneath it. Someone believed me now. I poured a cup of motel coffee and sat by the window, watching the parking lot. It was late afternoon. The sun slid low, glinting off the car hoods. That same light struck the page again, making the embossed seal shimmer faintly. Proof that something, finally, had turned my way. A knock sounded at the door of the room next to mine. Someone laughing, dragging luggage, a muffled television switching on. For the first time in a long time, normal noise didn't feel intrusive. It reminded me that life kept moving outside this fight. Still, I couldn't let my guard down. Luke was cornered now. Every step toward truth made him more unpredictable. He'd built his power on my silence. Now that silence was gone. I gathered the papers into a neat stack, slipped them into a manila folder, and wrote in black ink across the tab. Court order, original. I'd learned my lesson about trust. Every copy, every timestamp, every envelope mattered. I called the public defender next. "The court issued the injunction," I said. "I saw the notice come through," she replied. "Congratulations. It means he can't touch the property until the next hearing." "He'll hate that," I said quietly. "That's not your problem anymore," she said. "Let the process handle him." Her confidence steadied me. But after the call, I stayed at the table, staring at the empty chair across from me. I could almost see him sitting there, young, impatient, tapping his pen against the wood, insisting he knew better than anyone. That memory used to hurt. Now, it only reminded me how far he'd fallen. When the sun dipped lower, I folded the letter back into its envelope. The faint reflection of the seal caught the lamplight again as I tucked it under my pillow. A small, symbolic gesture, but one that meant the system saw me as real again. The stakes were simple now. Keep the proof safe, stay calm, survive the next 14 days. I washed the mug, turned off the lamp, and locked the door chain. Outside, a truck engine rumbled, then faded into quiet. I told myself the fight was contained in paper and process now. Then, just past midnight, I heard a slow, deliberate knock at my door. He came to my motel that night. He knocked at midnight. The sound cut through the quiet like a blade. For a moment I thought I'd dreamed it, but then came another, harder, faster, angrier. I sat up, heart pounding, the dim glow from the motel sign spilling through the thin curtains. Then I heard his voice. "Open the door! You think this is over?" The air in the room was thick and stale. I could smell the sharp bite of liquor even before he spoke again. I pulled on my robe, hands shaking as I reached for the phone on the bedside table. He slammed his fist against the door. "You ruined me. You think they'll believe you?" My throat was dry. "Leave, Luke," I said, loud enough for him to hear. "The police have the order." He laughed, short, ugly. "You don't scare me with paper." I dialed 911. My voice trembled at first, but steadied halfway through. "My son is outside my motel room. He's drunk, shouting threats. Please send someone." The operator's tone was calm. "Stay on the line until officers arrive. Don't open the door." I waited, every second dragging. His voice rose and fell, slurred with rage. "You never cared about me. You wanted me to fail." Then silence. Only the faint hum of the motel fridge filled the room. I didn't trust it. I kept my back to the wall, staring at the handle until I heard the low rumble of a car engine pulling in. Blue lights flashed against the curtains. "Police!" someone called out. "Step away from the door." Through the window, I saw him, shoulders slumped, arguing weakly as two officers guided him back. When the knock came again, it was firm but measured. "Ma'am, it's safe now." I opened the door a few inches. The officer who spoke smelled faintly of cologne and rain. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "He's my son," I said softly. "He's angry I took him to court." He wrote something in his pad. "We'll file a harassment report. He's been warned. If he comes back, we'll detain him." I watched them walk him toward the cruiser. For a second, he turned his head. His face looked older, hollowed out by defiance and drink. I couldn't tell if it was guilt or hatred in his eyes. Maybe both. The officer returned, handing me a copy of the report. "Here's your case number. We've noted the time, 12:47 a.m., and the complaint statement. Keep it with your documents." I set it beside the court notice on the nightstand. 2 papers side by side. One that protected me, one that proved what he'd become. Together, they were my defense. When the car drove off, I sat on the edge of the bed. The smell of alcohol lingered faintly in the hallway, mingling with the motel's damp walls. I thought of the boy I used to read to at night, who once believed monsters lived outside his window. Now he'd become one, and I was the one hiding. I barely slept. The next morning, a pale light crept through the curtains. I folded the report, slipped it into the folder marked Court, and packed my bag. My hands moved mechanically. Wallet, keys, letter, coat. Each item was a piece of armor. At the front desk, the clerk looked up. "Rough night?" she asked. I forced a small smile. "You could say that." When I stepped outside, the air was cool and sharp. A squad car was still parked down the street, engine idling. One of the officers nodded to me through the window. I nodded back, grateful but exhausted. The courthouse summons waited on the passenger seat of my car. Final judgment scheduled for Friday, 10 a.m. My chest tightened reading the date. Everything would end there. Years of silence, lies, and shifting blame condensed into a single verdict. As I started the engine, I glanced once more at the motel door behind me. The chipped paint, the dent where he'd struck it, the faint echo of his voice. All of it would follow me into that courtroom. But I wasn't afraid anymore. He still thought he'd win. The courtroom fell silent. Even the shuffle of papers stopped. The judge adjusted his glasses, voice steady but heavy with weight. "In the matter of contested assets and unauthorized transfers," he began, "the court finds sufficient evidence of misappropriation. The property in question is to be reinstated to the petitioner, effective immediately." I gripped the edge of the table. The air in the room thickened with a kind of held breath. Then came the sound, sharp, decisive, the gavel striking wood. It wasn't loud, but it carried. That single crack traveled through my bones like the end of a long-held note. Luke sat 2 rows ahead, his lawyer whispering frantically. He didn't move. The judge's voice continued, outlining penalties, naming dates, ordering restitution. Words I dreamed of hearing but never truly believed would come. Further, the respondent is referred for investigation on counts of fraud and document falsification. The clerk looked at me briefly, then back at her screen. The murmurs began around the room, quiet at first, then rising like a ripple through water. Someone coughed. A woman whispered, "Good for her." I exhaled slowly. I didn't smile. The relief was too raw for that. My hands trembled, not from joy, but from release. Months of fear, paperwork, and sleepless nights compressed into one written judgment, stamped and real. The judge leaned forward. "You may collect the certified order at the clerk's desk. This matter is now concluded." Another measured strike of the gavel. Finality this time. As people stood, chairs scraped the floor in uneven rhythm. Luke finally turned toward me. His face was blank, unreadable. A shell of arrogance cracked, but not yet collapsed. For a moment I saw the child he once was, the one who used to hide behind me in crowds. But then he looked away. "Ma'am," the clerk said softly, handing me a folder. "This is your official copy. Keep it safe. The title transfer will be processed within 48 hours. I nodded, the paper cool in my hand. It smelled faintly of ink and old air, the kind that lingers in every courthouse. The public defender met me in the hallway. "You did it," she said, not as triumph, but as truth. "I just told the truth," I answered. She smiled faintly. "That's rarer than you think." Outside, light poured across the courthouse steps. People moved past me, their voices blending into a single low hum. I walked slowly, folder pressed against my chest. The wind carried the faint echo of the gavel's strike. It felt like it followed me out into the world. At the bottom of the steps, I paused. Across the street, a reporter was speaking into a microphone. Cameras flashed. They weren't pointed at me, not yet, but the story was already leaving my hands. Justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't roar, it hums. Quiet, steady, undeniable. A woman from the gallery stopped beside me. "You're brave," she said, almost shy. "He deserved what came." "I don't know about brave," I replied. "Just tired of being quiet." She nodded and walked on. I looked back once more at the courthouse doors. For months, they'd felt like walls. Now they looked like gates. Luke was standing near the columns, head bowed, speaking with his lawyer. He didn't approach me. He just watched as I stepped toward the street. I didn't owe him words anymore. My lawyer caught up to me. "We'll handle the paperwork," she said. "You should rest. Go home." Home. The word sat heavy on my tongue. It wasn't just a place. It was everything he'd tried to take. I ran my fingers along the folder's edge. My name, typed cleanly across the top, unmarred and whole again. I'd waited for that sight for too long. The sun hit the courthouse windows, and the reflection shimmered like glass finally wiped clear. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't standing in someone else's shadow. I turned toward the parking lot. The engine of a car started nearby, maybe his, maybe not. It didn't matter. I was done fighting. The paper in my hand said so, but I still had to go home. The walls smelled of fresh paint and lies. It hit me the second I opened the door. The color was new, a pale beige that tried too hard to erase what it covered. My house looked cleaner, sharper, but wrong in every corner. The air still carried the faint bite of chemicals, sharp and artificial. Not a trace of lavender, not a hint of the home I'd built. The floorboards creaked as I stepped inside. It was the same sound as before, but emptier somehow, echoing through rooms stripped of their memories. The living room window was open halfway, curtains gone, light spilling through too brightly. My neighbor Carol waited at the doorway behind me, holding a clipboard and a sealed envelope. "He left it in a rush," she said. "Didn't even finish patching the walls." I looked around at the uneven brushstrokes, streaks where paint dried too fast. "It figures," I murmured. He was always better at beginnings than endings. Carol hesitated before handing me the envelope. "The inspector asked me to give you this. You'll need to sign before they finalize the handover." Inside was a printed form, a property inspection report, dated 2 days after the court order. Words like partial repair, water damage, and missing fixtures were neatly typed, their precision colder than any argument. At the bottom, a blank line waited for my signature. "Do you want me to stay?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, I need to do this alone." She nodded and set a small stack of photographs on the counter. These were in the mailbox. He must have sent them before he left. The first photo showed my kitchen, half renovated, tiles pulled up, paint buckets in the sink, a coffee mug sitting untouched by the window. The next captured the hallway, where family, pictures used to hang. The nails were still there, little punctures in the plaster, like the walls were still bleeding. "He thought he could fix this place," I said quietly. Like paint could hide what he'd done. Carol stepped back toward the door. "If you need help cleaning up, just knock," she said softly. After she left, I walked through each room in silence. The bedroom door stuck slightly at the top, the way it always had. I pushed it open, half expecting to see my old quilt, but the bed frame was gone. Just a mattress leaning against the wall, and the faint outline of furniture where dust hadn't settled yet. I picked up one of the photos again. It showed a shelf where Luke had once displayed his school trophies. The shelf was empty now, save for a single screw sticking out, bent to one side. I pressed my thumb against the rough patch on the wall, remembering the sound of him hammering it in years ago. All this damage wasn't just structural. It was the residue of a man who tried to erase someone else's history so he wouldn't have to face his own. I sat down on the floor and signed the form. My name looked steady on the page, sharper than it used to. Beneath it, the witness signature line stayed blank. No one else needed to confirm what this was. Proof of ownership, yes, but also proof of what loss leaves behind. I folded the papers, slid them into the envelope, and leaned back against the wall. The smell of paint clung to my clothes. It wasn't unpleasant, just invasive. Something that didn't belong to me yet lived here now. I thought justice would feel like relief, but it was quieter. It didn't sing. It just settled, heavy and unremarkable. As I stood to leave, I caught my reflection in the dark window. For a second, I saw the woman who'd walked out of this house a year ago, frightened and uncertain. Then I saw the one who'd come back, tired maybe, but still standing. I turned toward the kitchen. The counter was bare except for a single item near the far corner. I walked closer. It was a mug, white porcelain with a faint chip on the rim, the same one I used every morning before everything fell apart. The handle was smooth from use, untouched by paint or dust. Somehow, through all of it, it had survived. I lifted it carefully, the cool surface steady in my hand. I found one untouched mug in the cupboard. I kept that mug for proof I survived. It sits on the kitchen table of my new apartment, the same chipped rim, the same faded glaze. Morning light filters through thin curtains, soft and forgiving. The air smells of coffee and new beginnings. Nothing fancy, just the kind that warms you from the inside out. I take a slow sip, steadying myself for another day that belongs only to me. The apartment isn't much, 2 rooms and a narrow balcony, but it's mine. The lease has my name alone on the line. No cosigner, no dispute, no hidden clause. I still check the drawer twice some mornings just to be sure the paperwork's really there. Old habits don't die easily, but they remind me how far I've come. When the volunteer coordinator called about the senior housing program, I almost said no. "I've had my fill of institutions," I joked. But she laughed, kind and unbothered, and said, "Then you'll fit right in." So I joined. We visit elders who've been tricked, coerced, cornered. People who still tremble when the phone rings. Some have lost savings, some homes, all of them their trust. When I walk in, I tell them, "You're not foolish. You were betrayed." That word lands differently when it comes from someone who's lived it. Last week, I helped a woman file a report against her nephew. She was afraid it would break what little family she had left. I told her what someone once told me: "You can love a person and still draw a line." She signed the form with a shaking hand, then looked up and whispered, "Thank you for being here." Later at the office, the coordinator handed me my own enrollment form to renew for the next quarter. "You've logged 62 visits," she said, impressed. "Would you like to continue?" I read the paper slowly, the lines crisp, the date typed neatly at the bottom. My hands didn't shake this time. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." The sun moved higher through the window as I walked home. I carried groceries in one arm, the volunteer badge still clipped to my shirt. Every block felt familiar now. The bakery on the corner, the park where children shouted over swings, the sound of a dog barking somewhere down the street. Life had gone on, quietly, without waiting for permission. At home, I set my bag on the counter and poured another cup of coffee. The steam rose gently, catching the light. Across the room, the mug gleamed faintly on the table, ordinary but unbroken. I reached out and held it for a moment, fingers tracing the same small chip. It wasn't just a relic. It was evidence, a personal record of everything I'd endured and refused to lose. I sat down, folded the new enrollment form beside it, and let the morning fill the silence. I don't dream of winning anymore. I dream of peace, of fairness, of mornings exactly like this, quiet, honest, and earned. I look toward the window, where sunlight has started to spill across the floor. The glow catches the papers, the mug, my hands. I sign my own papers now. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me which city you're listening from. I read every comment. If the story touched you, you can support the channel with a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this every day. Your encouragement really helps. I'd love to hear your thoughts and what moment stayed with you. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's plenty more on the channel as well. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next life story. With respect and gratitude.